go back to a little bit into the beginning, right? How did you get into this? Yeah.
I guess I'll start from about 1992, 1992. So that was when I was a young lawyer.
Yeah.
Very privileged, got a very good job, but not so happy in my job. It's like I did law, it's supposed to be about justice, but here I was in a very large law firm, mostly acting for big companies and banks, sometimes acting against the little person. And so it didn't seem so meaningful.
Yeah.
Then I got a spot at the Queenstown Community Centre to do pro bono legal counselling.
Yeah.
Nowadays, quite common, and there are many opportunities. But in those days, there was only one organisation that ran this, and that's the Singapore Association of Women Lawyers.
Yeah.
They had 12 centres, and that meant that there were like 12 spots. Very few, right? So you couldn't get onto it unless someone retired.
Yeah.
So one of my colleagues was pregnant and said, hey, can you take over this? I think I'd love to, although I don't do family law. And that's how I started. And I would go into this room about the size.
Yeah.
And there would be maybe about 7 to 8 women waiting outside. Their stories were quite similar. Most of them related to a difficult marriage, difficult family situation.
Yeah.
Many of them had either given up work or were low income with kids. And their choices were, this is not working out for various reasons. Sometimes it was that the husband was not so responsible, had mostly either infidelity, some sort of a addiction problem.
Yeah.
And they found themselves in very difficult situations. And that's when I realized that the options that these women had who were mothers, and of course, I wasn't a mother, I was like, wow, they have very constrained options. They were constrained a lot because of how society was organized, that the women gave up their jobs, that they were expected to take care of the kids on their own.
Yeah.
That divorce was frowned upon, and then they felt like there were all sorts of other issues if they would choose that course. And they often didn't even have that as an option because they had no money.
Yeah.
So that's when I started to think about the situation of women. And this just happened for years, right? People just kept coming to see me. And I was also very inspired by the fact that even though it was very difficult, they always lived for their kids.
Yeah.
It was their kids that kept them going. And I imagine that if I were in that position, I would be a lot less courageous. But when they left that room, you could see that there was some light. And often they would be just so thankful that they at least understood what their options were. They were in a position now to at least think about what is my next step. And it wasn't so bad because we're just talking about one step at a time. So I think that's what kept me going for years. And then I've been doing it since then.
So we're going to circle back to Corinna and check in with like how she also started to evolve in her approach of like how are we supposed to solve this on a systemic level, right? And the interest in male issues started to peak. But let's flip over to like Ghaz. So like how did you even get started on your journey with like the movement that you began?
So my background is that I started off as an actor. I do a lot of theatre and I do a lot of applied theatre work like forum theatre, playback theatre. In forum theatre, we always look at how to tackle social issues. And one of the big thing was like how to intervene and how to be an active bystander, right? So I've been aware of the gender conversations for a while, but I've always felt like it's not my place to be part of this conversation, you know, and I hear it, but I'm just like listening, but I was never really involved in it.
Yeah, and I'm going to just pause you there just to give like the listener some sense of like where to place Corinna's story and Ghaz's story in a historical sense. And so Corinna, you were talking about the 1990s, and Ghaz, as you're sharing this is
for me, I started to really get involved in 2020, COVID.
Okay.
Right.
So this is like
During
COVID.
during the lockdown period, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of conversations online,
Yeah.
and there were basically guys who, they were also doing a podcast, and there was some contents that were misogynistic,
Okay.
right? And then so the group of women were saying, hey, we're not comfortable with this content, and they were saying, I'm not going to be listening to it, and things like that.
Yeah.
And then the fans of the podcast was very offended because this podcast has given them a lot of guidance in terms of because they do a lot of content about how to live, basically, right? And a lot of things like, like financial matters, religious matters, and things like that. So I would say the conversation got convoluted because they were talking about the artistic content of the podcast.
Right.
But versus the other group wanted to talk about, how misogynistic some of the content was, but the language that I'm hearing, it's not so much about the podcast that I was concerned about. I was more concerned about the people. They are having a discussion.
Yeah.
They are not listening to each other, and they were very angry about each other. And I was also looking at the men and how they comment as well. I can understand where they come from, growing up as a man, and going through this journey as well. So I thought, hey, there's a gap there, and what can I do?
And,
right?
and you're thinking is what can I, the individual,
As an
the
individual
actor.
do. But even then, at that time, I heard this call, but I didn't have the courage yet to intervene. I didn't have the courage until it affected people around me. It used to be like far removed, like away from me. I'm not affected by it. But then now suddenly, even a content on internet is now seeping into my family and into my home. The war is affecting my house.
Yeah, the war has come home.
The war has come, So I was like, oh wow. And I had to intervene. So first I dealt with my my family, and that gave me the courage, and then that also gave me the idea of like, hey, this is what I can offer. Right. And so I tried to ask around. I say, hey, who would like to be interested also to have this kind of conversations? Let's figure out what to do about it. So the first year was mostly just discussing about what are the issues and how do you want to tackle it. But the thing is, we realized that, wow, the conversation was so broad and so complex and so complicated. We don't know where to begin.
If there's someone listening right now who has never been a part of this conversation, or it's never occurred to them that there needs to be a conversation between men and women, could you name maybe 2 or 3 specific questions that were for you very important to talk about?
How the men get involved in, let's say, teenage pregnancies, right?
Okay.
And then, of course, all the attention is to the women, right? Or to the ladies who are pregnant. How about the men? Because they are also clearly very involved in this pregnancy, or rather they contributed to it, right? And but nobody is talking about, hey, how do we, the guys is just non-present in the conversation. I think there was a forum theater, I think, or a show or something that talks about teenage pregnancy, and most of the audience were just women. So where are the guys, How come nobody's talking to them?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because there's always talk about single mothers as the issue. Then what do you call the men who are involved in the issue?
There was also a lot of people talking about mental health of men and things like that. And we just couldn't decide where to begin. There's so many, and it's all very nuanced. That year was mostly just finding out what are the issues, and there's a lot.
Yes.
To a point I got overwhelmed. And they were like, okay, so what are you going to do, guys? What are you going to do about this? I was like, I don't know yet how to shape this or what we're going to do with this group, right? We're just having conversations. And then I took a pause for that conversation, and I just start to learn. And during that time, that's where people start introducing me to other men who are also trying to find answers. And that's how I meet Hafiz.
So Hafiz Hassan was also featured in our season 2 podcast. We'll put a link in the show notes on that.
So shout out to my bro, Hafiz Hassan from Brother Circle. He's also now a core member of the Singapore Male Allyship Network, SGMAN for short. Basically a group of guys who are trying to learn to be better. And I think in these gender conversations, nobody's talking to the boys.
Right.
Nobody's talking to the guys.
Yeah.
So and I think a guy should do it.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that's filling the gap lah. For me, it's like, okay, so let's find out from the guys, what's up. And then as I hear some of these conversations, I realize that there's a lot of underlying issues.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And so I start to reflect also on my journey and how, like growing up as I actually wasn't comfortable to call myself a man for a long time. So like I call myself a dude or guy or boy. I think only in my late 20s then I start to say, yes, I am a man. And also I start to question that why? Why? Is it because this expectation of man and I feel like I don't fit? So I cannot qualify myself to call that because it feels like I don't fit into that.
Yeah.
So I also went on a journey to find and define my own masculinity.
I think there's like a lot of richness that we're about to get into in your story. I am going to flip the mic over to Corinna because like when we stopped Corinna's story, she was like back in the 90s still, like man, all these like women issues and what are all these like men doing to the women. And could you catch us up on your journey? So there's Ghaz in 2020 figuring out like his stuff, and here's Corinna in the 1990s. Like what on earth is going on with these women? What's these systemic issues? Give us like a quick journey of how you evolved in the way you saw what was happening, and how did it eventually lead you towards strong interest in men's issues as well?
Okay. Yeah. So in terms of my social justice work, I was working much more at so there was the individual level where I was giving legal counseling, but I was also working at the legal and policy level. Yeah. Wasn't doing anything with men, except for one campaign that Aware had, which was called the White Ribbon Campaign. And this was men against gender violence. Yeah. And this was actually started in Canada quite early on. I think it's been going for 30, 40 years by a guy called Michael Kaufman, who we work with even today. And so this became a global campaign from Canada to the world. So that's the only sort of work that I did with men. Yeah. But on a personal front, I started to actually reflect about my dad. Yeah. And I come from a family of my mom, two sisters, very female dominated. Yeah. Even my dog was a female. Only my dad was a guy. And I think he probably always felt that. Yeah. Like he always wanted a son, and not because he didn't like girls. He actually really loved his daughters. But he just wanted like company, like you can play football or something. So my dad was a very good father. He worked, typical sort of Chinese man of his time, worked very hard, very good breadwinner, very stoic, even till the end. When he passed about 2-3 years ago, he was just very stoic, right, from beginning to end, as far as I knew him. Yeah. And he always wanted the best for us. We were all sports persons. He encouraged us, he coached us, he drove us for all our games. Yeah. And we had two main conversations: schoolwork and the sport. We never talked about anything, no feelings, nothing, that was soft and squishy. Except he was a very serious guy. Yeah. And all of the fun parts and all the caregiving was left to mom. And they very intentionally divided their roles. They actually had discussion. Okay, you do this, you be the disciplinarian, and I'll be like, mom. So we were all very close to mom. And I think my dad felt quite left out in a way, but he didn't also know how to become part of this group, right? Yeah. And we all loved and respected him. Yeah. But the girls were not close to him. We didn't have that emotional bond. He retired at 60, and then he went into a depression because there was no more work. And aside from his girls, work was his life, right? I think the primary thing that gave him purpose, that he woke up for every morning, was his work. And now there was none of that. And that meant also no more friends, because his friends came from work. And so there was now this emptiness, and he fell into a depression.
Yeah.
And I say that the thing that struck me about this was that I lived in the same flat as he did during that period.
Yeah.
And I did not know that he was in depression. And for 5 years, I did not know.
Wow.
Right? And I felt like, gosh, we are a close family.
Yes.
But there was just such a big emotional gap with my dad that I could not cross that. When we have the conversations about women, like, where are the men? I also reflected on men's lives and what happened to my dad after. So this story has a happy ending.
Yeah.
What happened to him after he recovered from his depression was that, 1, he found religion. 2, he found himself. And he found himself because he didn't have that work thing and he didn't need to prove himself. And he also had a lot of health conditions, but he had a very sort of high quality of life.
Wow.
He sort of had long walks till the end. But because he felt like there's finite time, right? And the mortality was weighing on him. And he just he just wanted to have that bond. And so he found it by just being relaxed and just by being like very chilled. And suddenly my father was a really fun guy to hang out with, right? And I was like, wow, I like this guy, which I didn't find until he got rid of his whole armor, right?
Wow.
That had to make him that strong father, which he maybe needed at that time. But once he could relax, I'm like, oh, so that's the real person.
Wow.
So we had about 15 years of that. I'm very grateful, even though he had all these illnesses, but he died in his sleep. And I think he died peacefully and content and feeling like I've achieved what I wanted. Also, I have a loving family.
Yeah.
Right. So that meant a lot to me, this personal experience. And it kept I kept thinking men are an important part of this work that I do.
Yes.
Except I don't know how to do this because this is an organization that has been focusing on women's rights.
Yeah.
The mission said women's rights.
Yeah.
And maybe about 2012 or 2014, we changed the mission to women's rights and gender equality. And that now meant that we could look at the other side of this, not war, but, this issue, this thing that we were trying to solve.
Yeah.
Conversation.
Yeah.
We could start having that conversation. Our mission was broadened.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'm glad. Thank you.
And I want to slow us down for a listener to hear this, that sometimes when we see that phrase gender equality, it isn't seen as a good thing. It isn't seen as wow, now men and women can start a healthy conversation with each other about what works better for us, right? It can be seen as still as adversarial. I question your motives or your agenda for why are you calling this gender equality? What's going on there? Yeah. I think the other thing that's coming up for me is I really loved the story you shared about your dad and how there seems to be this chasm of disconnection between men and women that can't seem to be crossed until someone is prepared to let go of the armor or let go of assumptions or whatever it is that keeps us from meeting each other halfway, right? It reminds me so much of what this marriage therapist called Terry Real said, that for marriage or society or whatever to work, right, you have to see that there are always these 3 levels you're trying to operate on, like me, you, and us, and it's all 3 different things. What's going on for me, what's going on for you, and then what's going on in this ecosystem of us. And I feel that just represents like this, how do we have a more equal, useful, helpful conversation between the genders? Yeah. I'm wondering, like, Ghaz, like, what's opened up for you as you're like listening to all of this?
We use a lot words like masculinity, equality, equity, and things like that. And sometimes, as we go through the conversation, I was like, hey, like I feel like we are having separate conversations. Like I feel like I'm talking something else, this guy is talking something else. Then I start to realize, hey, hold on. What do you understand? What do you define? Like the word masculinity, for example, right? And what it is in the dictionary, it just says attributes of a man. What I think attributes of a man will be very different from it's like as many people there are. That's as many definitions of men, right? So I start to realize that hey, this word is subjective and it reflects expectations. So I think rather than like using that word, oh, this is what I think masculinity means, so what do you expect a man to be? I think it's very important to set the context for the conversations first and then define, when I use this word, this is what I mean. So those are that's what comes up with me when we talk about this. And that's also one of the things that I've learned is that masculinities are plural. So as femininities, it's talk about expectations, right? And it's not just an expectations that men carry and men have as well. It's like everybody, when they think of a man, everybody will have some expectations,
Yeah. There isn't a very cohesive conversation in Singapore yet, right, about what are some of the societal definitions or stereotypes of masculinity that we've been operating under for a long time. I think that is changing. There's been CNA articles, there's been like new groups that are talking about that. I'm going to put down some insights that we found in the citizen circles we've been running at Common Ground about what were some top voted unhealthy, unhappy stereotypes that men themselves said is like, please, like, don't do this to us, it's painful. And I wanted to get like both of your reactions to it. So we had like 19 men of all kinds of backgrounds show up, and when we asked them what are some of the stereotypes that you hear at home and at work that are just not useful for you, this is what they came up with, right? Number one, a man must be a man, right? It's like as vague as that. An example of that is when someone tells them, I hate it when you cry, men can't cry, you have to man up, right? And that makes them wonder, like, what does it even mean to be a man? The second stereotype they found very unhelpful was a man must be the alpha leader, right? So that can sound like, oh, you better lead all the decisions here, right? And like you should know what to do, right? And for the men, they felt like it's, I can't expect to be supported here, right? I should always expect to be rejected if I ask for help. The third unhelpful stereotype was the man has to be the Superman, right? I can get everything right all of the time. And how the men in the room explained it is like, there's this whole burden of like, you not only have to raise your family, you got to go to the gym, you got to like get rid of your beer gut, you got to like maintain your like looks, And I think that was surprising. And by the way, like my team is female dominated, so none of us could be in the room, right? To even have that conversation, we had to send in like the man on my team who runs the hospitality of the building, the management of the building. So he ran this, like, all kudos to Kevin if you're listening to this. Anyway, the fourth unhelpful stereotype, a man must be tough, control his feelings and not be hurt, right? And one of the stories that the men shared there was, and this was from a boss figure, right? So the boss told his like male employee, like, look, like you're a guy, you're a male, so I can be rough with you and I can insult you and you can take it. I don't need to be as careful with you as I am with the women on the team. And the man felt very like affronted listening to this. And the fifth stereotype is the one that I think everybody knows. A man must be the breadwinner and he must earn more, right? A successful guy is someone who has a high-paying job. The end, full stop. Right. So these were the top 5. And I'm wondering what's come up for both of you.
Firstly, a comment on Terry Real's quote. So, me, you, us. And I think that's all true. And we need to take into account really what's happening in society and all the structural stuff, right? Which is also then sometimes embedded in laws and policies.
Yeah.
For example, a law that says men are not able to get maintenance unless they are disabled, right? Maintenance from their partner, even though their partner may be earning more money. So I think that sort of embeds the position of men as you're expected to be the breadwinner.
Yeah.
Right. So and why there is, I think, that tension, why people get upset as well, because it's not just about me, you, us. There's a whole lot of societal expectations, right? But certainly to the man that was closest to me, he felt all of this. He couldn't cry. He only could show some emotion sometimes when he felt emotion for his family. Otherwise, I could just really feel his stoicness, right? And it becomes then habit, and then it becomes like, now you can't cry.
Yeah.
The alpha leader, getting things right at all times. He never asked directions, never. We would also argue about things, and he would never, ever, ever back down. And I'm like, you're not making sense at all, Dad. You usually are quite logical, but he would sort of, in certain arguments, he was just wrong. But he would never admit it, right? So all of these pressures, it's really tough. And no one ever says, like, we understand this, because that's what you're expected to be. And we can't even talk about it. So that whole conditioning just makes it impossible, right, for them to even open up and say, I'm feeling all these things. And there's all of this pressure because of that requirement of stoicness, right? So yeah, I mean, I saw all of that, and I think that is still the pressure on men, and that then leads to all the other sort of the negative stats about men's suicide being twice that of women. Yeah. There are more men in jails, etc., right? There are all of these things that are societal expectations that can have very negative consequences, especially when you think that that's the only way to be a man. So you're opening up that sort of that space to say there could be different masculinities, right? But yeah.
I remember the very first gathering of men I was in. Yeah. Somebody asked how to be a man. A man is singular. I was like, wow. How to be a man. And to give a background of like my upbringing, I would say like I think I'm very privileged in the sense that my parents allow me to be and behave however I want. I was a girly boy. I grew up in the 90s where, girl power was the rage. My superheroes were like Jean Grey, Storm, Buffy, Xena, the warrior princess, and things like that. And I would I would put a towel over my head. I think my parents allowed me in a sense, and they didn't really scold me anything about it. I didn't feel ashamed of it. However, when I go out into the world, that's when people say, hey, you are weird, So all these things that they say about, because I cry all the time, and I allow myself to cry. And it's okay, I don't know, I guess it was okay for me to cry. So I never fit into that box growing up. And then later on, when I want to go into, starting dating, and that's when it's also like, I got the, I think it's your shoulders. You don't like, my shoulders wasn't big enough, it looks like I can't carry the weight of the world. So that's where I started to go gym and stuff like that. I feel like, okay, this is how. So I started to.
Did a woman say that to you, or did a man?
It was
oh my
woman.
Goodness.
It was a woman.
That's terrible.
But like I said, this is expectations. It comes from everybody, and that's of course, like, you have to be strong and stuff like that. But it's not so much because we are men, it's because we are soldiers. Even women in the military have to be strong, they have to, because that's the role that you are putting in. So a lot of these things, conversations, right? Every time they use the word man, woman, I said, does it have to be gendered? And when I replace the word man to, like, for example, when they say must lead decisions but must not expect to be rejected or supported and stuff like that, I think you're talking about a leader. So any leader must lead all decisions. So it could be a woman who's the leader, and the woman must lead all decisions. I don't know.
Now, of course,
Description.
society has also conflated. So a lot of leadership traits, they are masculine traits. It is only recently that, being vulnerable, being authentic, that these have sort of slipped in, but it's still, it's a fairly new thing. Right? Before that, it was, you have to be strong, right? And you have to be also aggressive. You have to look a certain way. That was the expectations, even if people didn't actually say it. But there's always the idea of man as a leader, right? And those traits that men were associated with became the leadership traits as well.
Every time somebody says, hey, this is weird, because it's weird because it's new. It's weird because you've not seen it before. My first work, teaching job.
Yes.
I was teaching, and I teach in preschool, right? And it was so strange when I enter the preschool setting. They were like, what? Even the kids, they couldn't. It's like, uncle, what are you doing here? I'm not an uncle. I say like, well, you can call me teacher. Uncle, no, don't call me uncle, call me teacher. Then he called me uncle teacher. I said, okay, fine, whatever. But that's the nickname. So uncle, they couldn't
like fathom.
Understand. Yeah, fathom.
A preschool teacher can be a man.
Yeah, and when I come in, they were like, oh, are you this person's daddy? And I was like, no, I'm not his daddy. I'm your teacher. He was like, are you this daddy? No, I'm your teacher. They couldn't see that, for a while. It's weird for them because they're not used to it. They've not seen it. So I guess a lot of people, when they say like, oh, that's awkward, that's weird. I say, just because you haven't been exposed to it. It's not normalized yet. My experience working in the preschool, that's where I start to see like, oh my, all these big issues that we see in the world, it stems from there. Like consent, for example, like I see in 3-4-year-olds, they haven't been learned yet about how to ask for consent. And I myself, because, as a male in a preschool setting, there's eyes were always on me, like when a kid touches me, it's always my fault, and but luckily I have a great boss. Shout out to Elaine. So at that time, she was like saying, hey, yes, the parents saw the kid sit on my lap, but the parent didn't see me putting her away. And I have to explain that I do not like surprise hugs, that if you want a hug, you have to ask, can I give you a hug? I say, and then if they ask me, can I give you a hug? I say, I prefer high five. So it's also teaching them, how to ask.
Yeah.
And at the same time, also how to receive no. Because sometimes they're like, oh, can I put my head on your lap? No explanation. I just said, no, I don't like that, stuff like that. You get them used to this. Even in that level, it's about friendship. It's about how they build connections. What I saw in the kids was like, okay, this child needs to learn how to manage their emotions, manage rejections, how to accept that it's okay, and how to request for a connection healthily and stuff like that, which I see missing a lot, and a lot of the adults hasn't learned that. So I'm learning a lot from teaching children, in the sense that, like, wow, that's, if I don't intervene now, like when they grow up, I could see, if I don't intervene now, this is the type of people, the abusers, the assaults, the violence, it may grow, it may escalate to become that. So
So in my work with some schools, secondary schools, who deal with like the teenagers in a mixed setting, right? You have boys and girls. There is a growing interest among some teachers of like, how can we better support these 13 to 16-year-olds to actually have a better understanding of what does it mean to, I suppose, grow up from a boy to a man, right? And I am very struck that the conversation is never how do we help the girls evolve into women. It's very focused on how do we help the boys evolve into like better men.
It's probably because it's really missing. There wasn't, and there wasn't any. There were all those civic morals, stuff like that, the general stuff. But one thing specifically I started to realize was, I think it's also quite important, like how to manage the urges. And part of it is so the sexual urge.
Right.
Right. I remember, I was at the MRT, and then ex-schoolmate of mine saw this girl, and they started to whistle and catcall her. And they look at me like, why are you not catcalling? I was like, yeah. I said, don't you find her attractive and things like that? I mean, like, even if I do find her attractive, like, I can manage my emotions. I can manage my actions. So I'm trying to also, and for me also try to understand why some men haven't, I suspect it's just because they haven't learned how to manage it, or it was enabled. Like they say, if I feel this, I have to act upon it in this way.
So like the catcalling, I think it's almost expectation as a man that you would do this.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I learned, going back to your questions about my research and interviews. And, when I did my SR Northern lectures, I need to have a chapter on men.
Yeah.
But I'm no expert on men. And so I decided to interview like 10 men. I sort of had my own criteria. But mainly it was people who I believed would speak honestly with me.
Yeah.
And tell me what their male experience was. And, from boyhood to manhood and beyond. Some of the things that struck me was there was a lot of sort of bullying that boys faced to be a man, right? And it was like nonstop and all the way till army, and you had to be a certain way.
Yeah.
It was very tough policing to be a certain way. And the more sort of male dominated, if it was an all male environment, that's when you really sort of felt it. That's why I feel like the army, and I know that, there are many, many sort of complex political, social issues that we have to deal with as to whether or not we should open up the army to women.
Yeah.
But yes, it does have the fact that it's all male, it just automatically brings out a certain behavior, right? And so, and it continues. And so the really honest guys would say, and these are professionals, successful, and like, on the WhatsApp with other very professional, very successful men, there would be locker room talk. And no one, so not like you, right? You'll say something, but most guys will keep quiet because they'll lose social capital. And the guys who are doing it, it's almost like you have to prove yourself as a man each time. Like you're not a man until you sort of prove it. And that's one thing that I read in the literature on masculinity and trying to understand why is it men keep having to do this, right? One, they're very competitive, right? So to be a man, you must be the alpha male. It means you must be on top. There's tremendous pressure to be number one in something, whether it's work or sports or women, but you must be number one. And some of it is this behavior that you must be like man, right? So then it becomes more like I'm doing it for other guys, but then you're not so impressed with your friend who's doing it. So he's like, what's wrong with you? Right? You should be impressed and you should actually be doing this. Then now he feels alone, which is a sort of a really nice way to respond, I guess, without telling him off. But you're not actually participating. So nowadays, some men will say, okay, if I'm in a group and there's a joke that is sexist or misogynistic, although I don't have the power, I'll just not smile or I will walk away. Because I cannot just stand up and say that's not cool, but I can at least show that I don't want to participate and I walk away, right? So I'm like, okay, I guess that's an option.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, as you're sharing that, like a memory comes to mind for me, like of like sitting at a table, and I think a guy there said something like quite mean. And it was not so much what the first guy said that was hurtful, but the fact that the other guy sitting at the table did nothing and said nothing. That was actually hurtful.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like when you see other incidents where the same thing happens, the same script happens, but you do have men at the table who like either say something or
Yeah.
do something that shows like this is not a universal thing.
Yep.
It's very comforting. It's very
Yep.
like protective.
Yep.
Yeah, and I always appreciate that, knowing that even among like men, they're trying to figure this out,
Yep.
and they are not content to just be a bystander,
Yep.
as you said. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the men that I spoke to who had been thinking about this for some time, and partly because he's bringing up a young son, and he thought about, I've been complicit so many times in my life, right? Just by keeping quiet. When the men were joking around and talking about women, I just kept quiet. I didn't participate, but that's really not good enough, right? He was now beginning to feel, because I don't want my son to be that way. Yeah. So you sort of need some self-reflection on this.
But I can tell, I mean, I've been in that position. I'm also guilty of that. You know, being quiet, not doing anything, because there's fear.
Yeah.
There's fear, anxiety. There is, like you said, you know, you want to secure your social standing in a sense. And speaking up is going against that. Will I be okay if I go on to this path, you know? So it does take a lot of courage. And even for, I would say like, when I want to start this as well, this is like huge speaking up, right?
Yeah.
The Speaking About Malaysia Network. I had to call my good friend, Michael Cheng, if you're here. Thank you so much, because I had to call him. I was crying. I was so scared. I said, I don't know. I think there was going to be a backlash. But
Did you feel some backlash already by that time?
I would say it wasn't that bad. I mean, there was a lot of like, what are you trying to do? Like, what is this about? And stuff like that. The first few things that that I started to try to question was like, let's look at our privilege, you know? And the question that people are saying like, why would I want to give up my privilege? I don't want you to give up your privilege. It's about harnessing it, like knowing what your privileges are and using it for good. You know, but some people, they are so scared that if I do that, I will lose my privilege. You know, I'm trying to figure this out as well. Like, because I myself have started to do gratefulness exercises and start to realize that, hey, you know, I'm so privileged to have this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to share it, you know.
I think what I'm very appreciative of you guys, when I hear your story, when I hear like Hafi's story, is it's such an encouraging sign of men gathering to support other men. Because I think from the women's side of the house, I think like women do want to support men, but we recognize there are certain places where you need another man to just go there.
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing like this strong sense of like men being there for each other. Like we're brothers, you know, we're bros, you know, that kind of thing.
I have to say the first few times it was awkward. But the thing is, it's awkward because we were not used to it. Right? But after a while, you know, it's like, hey, actually this is nice. Hugs are nice. So I can, you know, I feel loved, I feel supported. And I was like, why did I deny this feeling for so long? When you get it out of the way, you can focus and you can focus on what really matters. Yeah. There's not enough models, not enough examples of men really expressing what they really feel. So I also try to do that for myself. And then when someone says, how are you? And I say, okay, I try to be honest. And I start to observe also like the people who are listening. They're like, I don't know what to do with this. This is unprecedented. Like, it's really, I say, I don't need you to solve my problems. I'm just like sharing my feeling. I just need you to hold space. And so I think it's something new. It's going to be a huge paradigm shift, and it's something like, you know, I'm hoping a lot of people will start to do more lah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think in the citizen circles that we ran, one of the intentions there was, how do we put together a resource guide, like a community resource guide that any regular person can use, right? To have that conversation with the men in their lives. And we purposely wanted to use words and phrases that men on the ground literally said like that would work for us. So we actually asked them like, what would be words of care or acts of care, whether it's at home or in the office space, what would care literally look like or sound like. And the simple phrases they came up with were really like were astonishing to me. And again, like I'm only getting this like in secondhand reports, right? But even looking at it in secondhand reports, it was quite I don't know if heartbreaking is the right word, but it was so simple to ask. So I'll give you an example. The most upvoted word of care that men wanted to receive at home was, "You can rest now." And what we designed was therefore a good question to ask, right? A man at home that you want to support is, would you like to have some rest this weekend? You know? Or like another phrase that they upvoted as like, we'd love to hear this at home is, it's okay to be upset and I'm here to listen if you need. The other thing that really stuck out for me is the most upvoted act of care at work, right? The number one was, invite me out for a meal and don't make it about work.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, that is as simple as that. And that was the ask. And the most desirable act of care at home was physical affection and affirmation. Like, give me an encouraging smile, an encouraging hug, like you said. And it just looks so simple to type it out on a community resource.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to support a man at work, ask him out for lunch. If you want to support a guy at home, just smile at him. But it's so heartbreakingly simple.
Yeah.
And you wonder, why isn't it done more?
Totally simple. And the thing is, I've seen a lot of guys who have accepted the role of wanting to be the provider, the protector. And it's really unrealistic in the sense that in order to be able to do that, they have to let go of some humanity.
Oh,
they
wow.
have to let go of feelings. They're just like a machine, you know? So I have met some guys who's like, I was like, wow, you know, like so unused to talking about feelings, so unused to these simple things that, you mean I can rest? You mean that's an option? Like, I have to do this. There's all these expectations. I need to fulfill all this because they are expected to be machines. And I guess a lot of times when we come together, and these guys will appreciate not just hugging, just being supporting, just having a space to listen, because they start to realize that I'm a human. What is so sad was we're making a lot of people, I don't think it's just a man thing, even some women as well, it's becoming like, as a society, we're making people into machines.
I think that there are some changes in society that is very relevant to talk about. So men used to be dominant because of the way that society was organized. For a long time, women didn't have equal education, but today you have more women graduating from universities than men.
Yeah.
Right? So that old natural dominance, and this was just like, oh, you gave women equal education. And there has been a book that's written by Richard Reeves. It's called Of Boys and Men. And it's about how boys' brains develop a little slower. They're just like, that's sort of a natural thing. And it's a fact. And so when they go to school at the same age as women, they actually do worse. So actually he's saying boys should just go to school a little later. It's a very controversial recommendation. But the fact is that biologically, boys' prefrontal cortex develops a little slower. So women do better. And then they get also before 30, they are actually doing very well in their careers. It's only when you reach motherhood, you have kids, then you see like a gender wage gap, etc. But a lot of women now have the choice as well to remain single, to not be with a man, to just pursue the career, to pursue other things. And so then men start to feel, one, what is my purpose in life? Women are not even, it's so hard to actually, get the woman that I want to be with as well. And then they're like, what's this women's rights about? There are so many women that are above me, right? So they don't see, they expect that old expectation is you have to be on top, the breadwinner, all of that. The world has changed.
Yeah.
And so what are we going to then see in the personal space? And this is where I have seen and also counseled women who are successful who say, so there's violence, because then the only way that I as a man can dominate again is my strength. And I will assert that, and I will control you. I don't even need to hit you, but I will use my power and control, and the fact that I still have some stature as a man, and that you as a wife should be obeying me. There's still that thinking. And I will use that in the personal front, right? So we have to be, even as women make progress, which is why I think that we can't, as a women's rights, gender equality group, just ignore men and say we just keep changing the laws, we keep empowering the women, because where we are being pulled back is actually men need to be liberated, right? From all the things that you said. They actually need to be able to be active fathers, to be okay to be the primary caregivers. If you don't have that, then it's going to be very hard for women to like reach the top and be the CEO, because that's usually a job that's supported by someone else, right? Working at home. So we need both to be liberated, but men's liberation to me has been much slower. I hear fathers and mothers say to their girl child, you can be anything that you want to be, we'll support you. You'll not hear that for a boy, right? They don't say that. And, you're the only preschool male teacher in your class, because
but
it's
now
still
getting more.
not. Now getting more. That's what we need to do, right?
Yeah, that's
we need to change the environment, because otherwise it's very difficult for an individual person to thrive in childcare.
Yeah.
And so we're going to start to close this conversation. But I want to close it on how can we, or how can any listener right now who's looking for, okay, I want some practical tips, right? Like I want to support the man in my life. I want to support my fellow brothers, whether you're listening to this as a man or a woman. What advice would you give them? Like if they're trying to design either a conversation or design a program or design some way to like reach out, right? To show support, right? What would you tell them? Like, please do this and please don't do this. Yeah. Like Ghaz, like what would be your take on it? If I'm just like a individual wanting to talk to a fellow guy or the dude in my life, what would be a simple thing that I could say or do?
I would say just to listen and check in and say, how are you? How are you really?
Yeah.
Because when you say, how are you? They will say, I'm fine. But don't stop there. There's always something underneath that I'm fine. Just be there to listen. One thing that I've been trying to do is I've also been trying to be honest and kind of lead by example. I say, okay, you know what? I'm also fine. This is happening to me, and this. And then I share my struggles, I share my joys, I share whatever. And hopefully that will also help them to also open up and also talk about their struggles. And then there's a space of listening to each other. It's not just, how are you? I'm fine, good, okay. Then small talk, talk about
weather,
food or weather or anything. Like sports or something like that. And really, like nothing personal in the sense that small talks of nothing to do with themselves,
right?
Or talk about what's happening in the world, stuff like that.
And if someone wanted to gather men together, right? What would be some definite, please don't call it that. Like should you call it a support group? Should you call it like a counseling session?
I'm still figuring this out, to be honest. I really don't know. Okay. And so as SG men, we knew that, when I first started, I said, hey, let's talk about masculinity. I literally had a friend who said, like, I'm not ready to talk about masculinities with other strangers or other men and stuff like that. It's awkward. Because it's new. Yeah. Right? And I don't know, for us, we try everything. We say, okay, let's call it a book club. I think one of the popular ones were the Silat. I said, we're doing a Silat workshop. But then during the Silat workshop, we also talk about our roles as men, our masculinities and things like that. But also got me to realize that this conversation can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
And it affects everything. We're talking about food, and you can have conversation about masculinities around food as well. I think what we need is just to remind ourselves that we're all humans.
Yeah.
And a simple checking in of how are you really?
Yeah.
And opening up yourself is I think it sets a good example for other people to also start sharing and expressing themselves as well.
I mean, what I'm definitely hearing from you is that if you want to support the men in your life, or you want to lean into the how do I support like a culture of healthy masculinity, sometimes it's not going in there, oh, let's talk about healthy masculinity. Then people are like, what are you talking about? But like just exploring it from simple activities, simple relationships, like, oh, what was your dad like growing up?
That's quite heavy also.
Is that hard to talk about?
That's hard too.
It can be. What were the sessions we did? Oh, crying. Like I cried. I supposedly. It's like people also cry because like there's a lot usually.
Yeah.
The talking about male figures in our lives, or sometimes the lack of it.
Yes. I think that's sort of going right there.
I mean, if you want to talk about that, go slow.
Yeah.
Or it's like, how are your parents first? How are they doing? Are they okay? All right, and stuff like that. Yeah, don't go straight away like, what's your father issue? No, don't do that.
Yeah.
I think that for men who are fathers, one easy way, and I think about my dad as an example, right, is to actually, and many younger men are doing this, right? So, and they in fact want to do it more. But even for men who don't want to do this or feel very awkward to do it, but connect with your child, right? And it doesn't have to be about work or sports. You can just like find out about that day. I don't think that my dad asked me like, what's happening it would be like, what's happening in school? And it would be like, focus on like how you're doing in school. But it's like, tell me about your friends. He wouldn't know about my friends, right? Just sort of have that conversation because I think children, one, they don't feel like they have to be on guard when they speak to their kid, right? The defenses are down and you see a more tender side to men. There's a motivation to want to connect. I mean, I'm glad my dad had his last 15 years to connect with us, but not every man will have that. But yeah, I mean, I tell the story often because it seems to move men.
Yeah. And
I've had like, I told this at Raffles one day, and the teacher immediately went to call his daughter, who lives in England, and says, hey, am I that kind of father? So it sort of gets men to think about it. So I think that's one, right? Just sort of like think about relationships, like you say. In terms of men's groups, and I think there's a lot of usefulness in that, although I'm not sure how many men will sign up to a men's group. But I think calling it a men's group and not a men's support group is already helpful. And then I'm told, like, don't call it counseling, call it coaching, mentoring, right? But the helpline, I'm not sure. I think it's a bit hard not to call it helpline, but maybe like men's line, men's link. I don't know.
I think Hafiz did very well with this, calling it brother circle, because literally there was some guys who's like, oh, I like it because it says brother.
Yeah.
So you knew the right name.
No, men resonate with band of brothers. They love that idea.
Right.
Yeah, because I think it's not, in a way, it's not wrong for people to desire to be seen and appreciated in their strengths.
Yeah.
And not treated as a weaker person. And I guess sometimes support group can feel like you're asking me to come in my weakness. Yeah. And I want to be seen in my strengths, maybe in all of the best ways.
Yeah.
Having said that, men should, it would be good if they could open up and sort of drop their armor. But I also recognize that a lot of their family members or friends might expect them to be a man. And, when you say, how are things going? It's hard, right? Because they're going to think, and I feel very sad when I hear a man say, I shared something and my partner said, I expected more from you,
Wow.
right? And that just breaks my heart, right? But that's the society we live in. So the work that we do has to be both at the personal level as well as the political, social level. Yeah, there's so much work to be done.
Thanks for sharing that, Corinna. I think it's a beautiful note to close this conversation. And what I'm getting out of listening to both of you talk is, first of all, I'm so grateful that both of you showed up for this conversation, right? Coming from different points of time, from different ways of wanting to work on this. And it is a small picture of what it would take for all of us in this society to work on this, right? Equally, right? Like to make the conversation not just about man and woman issues, although that is really vital to talk about because that is how it's framed in society, but to also dare to go at a very human, tender level of what's going on with you and to not give up, even if the other person goes, I'm fine. Yeah, and I think that can go a very, very long way, being consistent in our desire to connect with each other and to see beyond the labels.
This is hopeful for me that a community group is talking about a topic like this and exploring it in depth, and that there is the people like Hafiz and Ghaz who are actually, being brave to buck the stereotype and do something that's quite different.
Yeah.
And leading the way. Thank you.
We try.
Yeah.
I'm learning also from a lot of you guys as well.
Yeah, thanks for being at the forefront of things for the both of you. Yeah. So we have a tradition on this podcast to close with just instinctive fill in the blanks, right? So no perfect answers, just go with your heart. What does it mean for both of you to be whole?
To be whole is to be authentic. Just be human. Just to feel everything. The sadness, the joys, the fears, everything. And enjoy every feeling.
Wow.
For me, me, you, us, the different levels that we exist, interpersonal, societal levels, all of that, right? To be a part of all of that makes me feel whole.
Wow. And for both of you, a community that you are deeply grateful for, who always makes you feel like you belong and you're home. Who is that for you?
For me, it's the Aware community that I've been with since 1990.
Wow.
Yeah.
For me, I would say it's the arts. I think the arts is the one that allowed me to be uniquely weird and unapologetically strange and allow me to be myself.
Wow.
And that's where I also learned about healthy masculinities, how and to accept. Coincidentally, a lot of the core members of SG Men are all in the arts because we all, I guess, we are true. I guess we have experienced training how to look at our emotions and express them and things like that. So I think everybody should do the arts lah.
Yeah, shout out to the arts. And how appropriate that the very last thing is what is one song or one thing that is very much a part of you? And what does that tell us about you?
The song that I actually, when I was driving, I'm like, oh, this is the song, is Underdog by Alicia Keys. And it's about how someone who is bucking the stereotype in some way is fighting for the underdogs in society that she just observes and you notice and you do what you can to stand for them because you know what it feels like to be also out there a little.
For me, I've been thinking about this. It's Orang Singapura by Zubir Said.
Wow.
What I like about Orang Singapura, sometimes translated to Singaporean, but directly it's Orang is person, Singapura is Singapore, but it means what it means to be a Singapore person. And I like that idea because you don't have to be a Singaporean. Anybody who's associated with Singapore, we talk about
Sorry, what is this?
Orang Singapura.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
Kalau sudah jadi
No, but we will
orang
put a link.
Singapura, hati
it's a
mau
song.
baik, berbudi bahasa. It's written by the guy who wrote our national anthem.
Oh, I've not heard the song.
Yeah, so it was when I heard it, I was like, wow, this is what a Singapore person is. Zubir Said has kind of like said it, and when I look at SG Men as well, it's the kind of branding of Singaporeans that I would like us to be, and it has to be like, be respectful, you have to be kind. And they also talks about being, the work ethics and things like that. When we talk about like, man has to be strong, and I make it sound as if it's a bad thing. Actually, no, being strong is good.
Yeah.
Wanting to work out is good. It's to be healthy and stuff like that. But I think what we are forgetting is that being compassionate is also good. I have a t-shirt here that says compassion is masculine. And I think
That's great.
what a lot of guys have also forgotten that we too can be nurturers.
Yes.
We too can be carers, and then don't deny that. Yes, strong is masculine. Yes, to be hardworking is masculine, but compassion, kindness is also masculine.
And I think self-compassion to start with.
Yes. Yes. On that note, thank you so much for spending time with us. I think it was a surprisingly tender and human conversation. So I'm very, very appreciative of this.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Xiaoyan.
Thank you.